Much has been made in recent days about Donald Trump's so-called Liberation Day tariffs, a sweeping new trade policy from his administration that, within hours of being announced, tanked the stock market and sent financial analysts into a tailspin. The tariffs range from 10% to as high as 50% on nearly every foreign country the US trades with, including a 34% surcharge on Chinese imports and a 10% levy on goods from the United Kingdom. And the stated public goal of these tariffs by the Trump administration is to bring jobs back to America and encourage multinational corporations to relocate factories, supply chains, and labor to US soil, with Trump even declaring that this would mark the beginnings of a new golden age of American prosperity.
These tariffs are going to give us growth like you haven't seen before, and it'll be something very special to watch.
I don't think Wall Street got the memo there, Trump.
Stock futures are down this morning. Wall Street saw substantial losses on Friday, and that drop was driven by worse than expected inflation data and existing anxiety over these pending tariffs.
The markets responded with immediate, overwhelming panic. Within 2 days, the S&P 500 had dropped 9%, financial institutions around the world began revising growth forecasts and even predicting price hikes across nearly all consumer staples within the US. Dear God, I just unironically said S&P 500 in a video. We are truly in dark days, everyone. This wasn't a careful negotiated policy shift, this was an executive-level economic grenade, one timed apparently for maximum dramatic effect. I mean, Trump branded the tariff announcement as Liberation Day, a name that sounds less like fiscal policy and more like the tagline of a dystopian shooter. Not even a good dystopian shooter, one of those like Xbox 360 ones that we can never remember today. Like seriously, stick that on the poster for Turning Point Fall of Liberty. Does anyone even remember Turning Point Fall of Liberty? And speaking of video games, the consumer fallout was fairly immediate too. Even Nintendo had to cancel pre-order day for the Switch 2, which raises the real crisis here. How the hell am I supposed to play Duskbloods? I need my FromSoft fix, people. Many economists were quick to point out what should be obvious to anyone who's ever taken a high school econ class, that these tariffs make no goddamn economic sense. Not in theory, not in practice, not even by the logic of Trump's own advisors. The math simply doesn't add up.
What his actual words were, these are the rates that these countries charge us. But when you looked at the rates, if you knew anything about foreign trade, and you didn't really need to know much, it was clear that the rates were totally out of whack. So some of the rates were crazily high. Vietnam was at 90%. Cambodia was, I think, around 90%. This little African country that a lot of people have been writing about in the last few days called Lesotho was at 99%. The EU was at 39%. But then there were countries that have a reputation for having relatively high trade barriers, like Brazil, and their rate was only 10%, which is the flat rate that Trump said every country is charging us.
Now, it should be very clear to all of you, I am not an economist, and I'm not going to pretend I fully understood the chart Trump had printed up like it was the back of a Denny's menu, but the crucial point here that I'll get to in a minute is, neither do I think does he. The chart had a bunch of numbers on it laid out like he just fed ChatGPT the phrase, make up some smart-looking numbers about tariffs. That might not even be a joke. The White House's chart included a literal error in the formula, one many believe came from someone using an AI model to generate economic projections. People are even able to replicate the same mistake just by plugging in prompts into ChatGPT, which kinda tracks because that's what ChatGPT does. It makes things up with confidence. Kinda like my sex life.
I actually just really started to mess around with math, and I mean very simple math, like literally just dividing, what if you divided imports by total trade, which honestly today still seems like it would make more sense, or what if you looked at trade deficit as a percentage of GDP, and I just went through a few options. There weren't that many options. And then I realized that it was the trade deficit the United States has with a country divided by our imports from that country. So that's the formula. If that number is less than 10%, then Trump just said it's 10%. Or if we have a surplus with a country, which we actually do with the UK and Brazil, then you get 10% as well. But it's basically just trade deficit divided by imports.
Even the, and I'm going to heavily emphasize this word, conservative think tank American Enterprise Institute crunched the Trump administration's numbers and found that none of it holds up under any scrutiny. Their assessment is quite blunt. Not only does the administration's formula have no basis in economic theory or trade law, but even if you pretend it does, the math is still wrong. As they put it,
now, our view is that the formula the administration relied on has no foundation in either economic theory or trade law.
And again, that's a conservative think tank, one that I don't really like, but it points out the fact that the issue with Trump's tariff plan is not one of ideological disagreement between Republicans or Democrats, it's objective spreadsheet-breaking nonsense. The kind of mistake you make when you're not just wrong, but you're not even trying to be right.
A deputy White House press secretary actually retweeted my tweet and said I was wrong and said that they had literally, he used the word literally, calculated tariff plus non-tariff trade barriers for each country. But in his tweet, he also put up the screenshot of this formula, which totally contradicted what he had just claimed, because it showed that they were just dividing the trade deficit by imports and using that number, basically.
The consequences, though, are very real. These tariffs are expected to push prices up on almost every staple Americans buy, from clothing to coffee to household essentials. They'll raise the cost of living while suppressing growth, and they'll make it harder for everyday Americans to afford basic needs, and it'll drive us even closer to a recession that we already were seemingly heading towards. And yet the conversation in mainstream press still clings to the hope that maybe Trump will recognize his error, maybe cooler heads will prevail, maybe the administration will actually fix the math. All while they sit there scratching their heads going, this doesn't make any economic sense.
For Council of Economic Advisors chair under President Obama, Jason Furman. He's a professor at Harvard Kennedy School of Government.
I think they're just so crazy that we're not going to have them 2 months from now. I don't think these tariffs are going to help. And so in that sense, we're still going to have a trade deficit 6 months from now. We're still going to have one 3 years from now. I think some of these go away because they're just so crazy.
Again, going back to conservative think tank AEI.
But if we're going to pretend that it is a sound basis for U.S. policy, we should at least be allowed to expect that the relevant White House officials do their calculations carefully. Hopefully they will correct their mistakes soon. The resulting trade liberalization would provide a much-needed boost to the economy and may yet help us stave off a recession.
There's a lot of expects and hopefully and may yet. Like, what the this is nothing of a statement. Okay.
And that right there is the tell. We have to pretend that this was an honest mistake, that the administration is miscalculating in good faith, trying to help the American economy. Because admitting the truth forces a much darker conclusion. This policy doesn't fail at its goal. In fact, it looks like it's going to succeed quite well. Because while these tariffs make no conventional economic sense, they make perfect sense if your goal isn't prosperity, but control. The goal of these tariffs is not to protect American prosperity, it's to deepen American economic hardship. Because that's what fascism feeds on.
And maybe this is not actually about reindustrializing the US. What this is really about is shifting the tax burden permanently off of capital, off of the rich, off of corporations, and onto workers, onto poor Americans. And the more I think about it, the more I see what they're doing, I think this is the real goal of what the Trump administration is doing. They say they're going to reindustrialize, but in reality, Trump has said several times, he said it publicly, that he wants to replace the income tax and certainly capital gains tax with tariffs, which is a very regressive tax.
Historically, fascist regimes don't arise out of stability. They are born in periods of economic freefall, mass unemployment, and collective anxiety. In post-World War I Italy, Mussolini's rise to power came on the heels of inflation, strikes, and a disillusioned working class. In Weimar Germany, Adolf Hitler leveraged the pain of skyrocketing unemployment, inflation, and national humiliation after World War I to paint himself and the Nazis as the only party who could restore order and pride. And in both these cases, the promise of authoritarian control was sold as a cure to economic instability. But in truth, the instability was the cure, at least from the point of view of the fascists, because it was the condition in which fascism could thrive. And that chaos doesn't have to look like immediate total economic collapse. In fact, it's much better if it isn't. Total collapse brings revolution. But a long, exhausting slide, a slow erosion of security and hope, makes people desperate enough to surrender their rights, but not be energized enough to fight back. It's misery, yes, but managed misery. And that kind of misery is already here before these tariffs. Most Americans aren't starving right now. Some are, but most aren't. But most are watching their grocery bills climb up each and every month. Hence why the symbol of egg prices has become so potent in political discourse. It's where Americans can most directly, tangibly see and feel the squeeze of wages that don't stretch far enough. A simple staple that every American usually gets every single week has suddenly become less affordable, perhaps not even justifiable and worth getting. And it's not just eggs, it's everywhere, from rent to medication to childcare to the creeping rise of entertainment costs. And this creates a psychological toll, the feeling that you're working hard, maybe harder than ever, and still falling behind. And that sense of slipping, slowly but constantly, is disorienting. That creeping sense of instability, that low thrum of fear, is exactly what makes people vulnerable to authoritarianism. Because enter the strongman. The fascist leader doesn't solve these crises, he thrives within them. He amplifies them. He stokes fear, resentment, and rage, not in spite of the failing system, but because of it. He presents himself as the only one who can rise above the dysfunction, who can impose order through force. And crucially, he doesn't just direct that rage upward, he channels it outward and inward towards immigrants, minorities, and internal enemies of the nation. And in this framework, the right's message becomes clear. What if you lose your job? What if inflation makes your paycheck worthless? What if the left comes to power and you become just another dependent, another mouth to feed in a collapsing system? You could end up like them, poor, powerless, disposable. You wouldn't want that, would you? And in America, that strongman is Donald Trump. He doesn't position himself as a servant of the country, he is the country. Every crisis is another opportunity to reinforce that identity. That's why these tariffs weren't just rolled out with bureaucratic language, they were branded.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day, waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again.
A term pulled straight from the playbook of fascist theater, evoking patriotism and rebirth. But importantly, a rebirth through suffering. That's the key. The hardship isn't a side effect of policy, it is the policy. The pain isn't a mistake, it's the mechanism. It's the currency in which allegiance is paid. Because when Trump speaks of sacrifice, he never means his, he means yours, for his glory, for your liberation. This is why the nationalism Trump invokes isn't just about pride, it's always framed as a battle, about sacrifice.
Americans are today a proud, free, sovereign, and independent nation that will always be free, and we will fight for it till death. We will never let anything happen to our beloved country.
It's not enough to love your country, you must be willing to hurt for it, and more specifically, hurt for him. Because when Trump is America, then his enemies become your enemies, and any pain you endure in fighting them becomes a badge of loyalty. That's again why the role of these tariffs was war rhetoric. That we need to fight back against China or the UK or the European Union. It's cast as the start of a global conflict, an economic revolution that required American blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Tariffs aren't policy, they're framed as weapons. And if you turn on places like Fox News, you can see this in action. Hosts openly talk about how Americans suffered after World War II, and maybe it's time we suffer again.
Look, when this nation used to go to war, people in this country would support the war effort with their materials at home and making things for weaponry and all of that. We got to do 100% buy-in over this bumpy period. Just communicate.
She's kind of talking about it as if economic pain is some kind of national sacrament, proof that we're finally doing something real, that we're in the fight. But are we at war? But that's exactly the point. Fascism needs a forever war. It always needs an enemy without, and as we'll get to it, an enemy within. But Trump understands this instinctively. He needs conflict. He needs grievance. On April 5th, the day the tariffs were implemented, he posted on Truth Social,
China.
Okay, let me channel this motherfucker.
China has been hit much harder than the U.S., not even close. They and many other nations have treated us unsustainably badly. We have been the dumb and helpless whipping post, but not any longer. We are bringing back jobs and businesses like never before. Already more than $5 trillion of investment and rising fast. This is an economic revolution and we will win. Hang tough. It won't be easy, but the end result will be historic and we will make America great again.
Turned into freaking JFK at the end there. Ugh!
It's all there. The victim narrative, the invented betrayal, the promise of greatness through endurance. Hang tough! It won't be easy! Your suffering is the point, and it proves your commitment. And in case China isn't enough of a villain, Trump is already manufacturing conflict elsewhere, picking fights with allies like Canada and even bizarre rhetoric about getting Greenland. It's not diplomacy, it's myth-making, a world at war with Trump at its righteous center. And it's just like any wartime state. The message to the public is clear: endure deprivation, accept struggle, embrace pain, because your pain is proof of your patriotism. Even Trump's own economic advisors have said the quiet part out loud. Larry Kudlow, one of the administration's key economic figures a few months ago, put it bluntly,
My generic point here with respect to affordability in the economy is we're going to have to suffer through some bad news. This has nothing to do with Trump. Trump's program's not in yet. And I've got people on the left who are blaming Trump. How can you blame Trump when he wasn't president when these seeds were planted?
This is the script. Economic hardship is real, yes, but it's not Trump's fault. And we see this narrative echoed again and again by Trump supporters. Take right-wing influencer The Quartering, who framed the backlash to the tariff as petty consumer whining.
You do not need a new iPad. You do not need a new cell phone. You do not need the new video game console. You want them. There is a big difference.
I don't know who the hell's saying this, but I hope whoever it is understands that want is what actually drives the economy. If all we did was buy our needs, the economy would stop fucking dead. I don't know who I'm quoting for this read, but god damn it, I hope they understand that.
Ah, The Quartering. He makes the best thumbnails with me in it. I like how I look really evil there. It's kind of fun. But what he's doing here is a sleight of hand, right? It's reframing economic pain not as material precarity, but as spoiled entitlement. If you're upset that you can't afford a new console or a phone upgrade, you're not struggling, you're weak. And if you're weak, well, maybe you deserve to suffer. It's your moral failing, not a failure of policy. Of course, this entirely ignores the material reality for millions of Americans who are struggling to afford basic needs, not because they're demanding luxuries, but because rent, groceries, and medicine have all surged while wages remain stagnant. But instead of acknowledging that, the MAGA movement sells this suffering as stoicism, a necessary discipline. And crucially, it's discipline in service of the national state, a kind of involuntary austerity rebranded as virtue. And by the way, while The Quartering lectures the public on the virtues of doing without, he brags about how much engagement and revenue he made off that very same tweet. Because of course he did. That's the model. Perform sacrifices for the masses while you're profiting from the narrative. He's acting in microcosm the broader strongman fascistic strategy. Consolidate suffering among the people, concentrate wealth and power at the top, turn pain into performance, and get rich while doing it. Because fascism doesn't emerge in a vacuum. It arrives when big money and the state cooperate toward a shared vision, not of prosperity for all, but of dominance for the few. In Nazi Germany, Krupp Industries, the steel and arms manufacturer, threw its support behind Hitler. German megacorporations like IG Farben, Siemens, Bayer, and Volkswagen all profited immensely from fascist rule. IG Farben, which produced the synthetic fuel and rubber essential for the Nazi war machine, not only collaborated with the regime on multiple occasions, but also manufactured Zyklon B, the gas used in extermination camps. And many of these companies used slave labor from concentration camps to slash costs and boost production, feeding directly off the machinery of genocide for economic gain. This wasn't incidental, it was the natural alignment of interests. Fascism offered capitalists things that democracy could not. Total control over labor, guaranteed markets through endless militarization, and the elimination of dissent. When capitalism enters crisis and public unrest threatens profits, capitalism doesn't resist authoritarianism, it embraces it. It sees opportunity. Because capitalism, at its core, is amoral. It's not designed to prioritize freedom or dignity or the benefits of humanity, it's designed to preserve itself. And fascism becomes not its opposite, but something that it interlinks quite well with. In fact, capitalism often paves the road for fascism long before the boots hit the ground. By reducing art to empty product without human connection, labor to exploitation rather than having people create something that they care about, and meaning to simple spectacle, it alienates people from the fruits of their work and the soul of their communities. And when people are stripped of connection, disillusioned by endless consumption, and told that their suffering is their fault, fascism steps in to offer a false sense of belonging. Nationalism, order, identity. Not freedom, but something that looks like it. Just enough to keep the machine running. We're watching the inevitable outcome of a system designed to extract, exploit, and concentrate until there's nothing left. Capitalism and fascism are not the same, but they feed off of each other quite well. And now, we have Elon Musk. Musk is one of the wealthiest men in the world, and yet he speaks with the desperation of someone who believes civilization is crumbling unless he is allowed to rule.
Well, I think it's like what we risk is a civilizational collapse. Yeah. And somewhat of a depressing civilizational collapse. If the birth rate keeps dropping every year and population just keeps going into this sort of like negative death spiral, literally, it won't die with a bang. It'll die with a whimper in adult diapers.
But he's not interested in stability. He wants collapse, because collapse is the opportunity to remake the world in his image. He has the power to do so. Oligarchs like Musk or Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos aren't trying to save the ship, they're actively trying to sink it. Their strategy involves eroding public trust in institutions, dismantling social support systems, and eliminating any communal space where people might gather outside corporate control. Under Musk's guidance, for example, Doge has overseen mass layoffs of over 280,000 federal workers and gutted agencies like the Social Security Administration, which now faces cuts to basic services like phone-based claims processing. It's sabotage disguised as thrift. And the endgame is a return to company towns, digital and physical, where survival is conditional on your obedience to billionaires' dreams. It's like that town from Severance, the one from the episode that everyone hated, though I kind of liked it for exactly this reason, because it showed this. It's a hollowed out place devastated by corporate overreach, where the economy serves only the employer and no one escapes, and then it's left devastated for decades after. And in some places, that future isn't speculative, it's already here. Look at all the towns where Amazon have set up its centers, becoming essentially the only employment in the area. Before the 2024 election, Musk laid it out plainly.
Most importantly, we have to reduce spending to live within our means. These efforts will involve some temporary hardship, but it will ensure long-term prosperity.
Temporary hardship, always temporary, right? He's literally that Mission Impossible villain, all techno-messianic gravitas.
The greater the suffering, the greater the peace.
You suffer now so that people like him can live out their utopian fantasies. A world with fewer rights, fewer protections, fewer communities, and fewer blocks to his ability to consolidate power more to justify reaching his self-appointed vision of the future. Because that's the deal fascism offers capital. Help us manufacture consent and we'll let you build your empire on the ruins. Even further, if we return to Larry Kudlow's quote, we can see the deeper strategy here at play.
My generic point here with respect to affordability and the economy is we're going to have to suffer through some bad news. This has nothing to do with Trump. How can you blame Trump when he wasn't president when these seeds were planted?
The message is clear. Yes, you're suffering, but don't look at us. We didn't do this. We're just here to clean it up. As the economy worsens, as Americans feel the pressure of rising prices and evaporating support systems, Trump and his allies will make sure the blame lands somewhere else. And we already know where that somewhere else is. Besides, the Democrats. It will be trans people. And whisper, whisper, the Jews. It's no coincidence that between when Trump announced his tariff plan and when they came into enactment, he also signed an executive order declaring April 2025 Child Abuse Prevention Month. And under this framing, child abuse means providing gender-affirming healthcare to trans youth. This isn't accidental timing, it's a signal, a declaration that even as the economic screws tighten, there will be a clear scapegoat. The reason that your family is struggling isn't because billionaires gutted public institutions, it's because they're transing the kids. And they is left purposefully vague, but generally means the Jews in charge of medical institutions, the billionaires who are influencing our culture. The Jewish billionaires, let's be clear, not the actual billionaires who are influencing our culture like Elon Musk. No, he's there to help us. We've seen this before. In Nazi Germany, as the economy collapsed under militarization and inflation, Jewish people were blamed for hoarding wealth and undermining national strength. And the Nazis then seized Jewish property, targeted their businesses, and imposed punitive taxes under the guise of protecting the German economy, all while they were also dismantling trade unions, slashing worker protections, and ramping up military spending. It was never about fixing the system, it was all about creating enemies to justify authoritarian control. And Trump's playbook is no different. And the scapegoating doesn't stop with trans people and the vague Jewish billionaires that they talk about over top of them. We're also seeing his escalating attacks on other institutions like universities, particularly those where students have organized to protest the genocide Israel is carrying out against Palestinians in Gaza. His administration is now withholding funds from colleges that have allowed such protests, claiming that they promoted anti-Semitism, despite the fact that Jewish students are among the most visible, organized, and courageous voices calling for an end to the violence. They're at the forefront shouting that the ones taking over buildings and demanding divestment from Israel. To accuse these students of anti-Semitism is not just bad faith rhetoric, it is anti-Semitism. Trump is drawing a line between the good Jews and the bad Jews based on how useful they are to his fascistic narrative. What Trump is doing, and what the broader far-right project is doing, is using Israel's genocide of Gaza as a wedge to institutionalize anti-Semitism in America under the guise of defending Jews, something that Israel has always been used for in America. By conflating criticism of a state committing genocide with hatred of an entire people, Trump is not protecting Jewish lives, he's putting them in greater danger. He is collapsing the distinction between Judaism and Israeli nationalism, and then using the manufactured collapse to justify silencing dissent, punishing universities, and then ramping up surveillance and control. And it's not just Jews and trans people, it's Muslims and Arabs, as well as immigrants generally. Mahmoud Khalil, a student protest leader at Columbia, was literally arrested and disappeared last month.
This weekend, a former student at Columbia University in New York was arrested by immigration authorities despite having a green card. Mahmoud Khalil, who helped organize on-campus protests against Israel's attacks on Gaza as part of its war with Hamas, was seized, according to President Trump, for allegedly espousing pro-Hamas views.
And the institutions being targeted are not random, they are deliberate. Universities are places of education, a public discourse, a political memory. They are among the last remaining third spaces where people, especially young people, can gather outside of corporate structures to challenge the dominant narrative. And so, they are being attacked. Not just because of what they are, but because of what they allow. Resistance, reflection, solidarity.
No longer will you be threatened on your college campuses. No longer will you be discriminated against in college admissions.
The goal is to gut them, to starve them of funding, discredit them in the public imagination, and turn them into battlegrounds where the state decides who is allowed to speak, all while pointing the finger at the people who are trying to stop a genocide and then saying that they're the real threats. This is how fascism protects itself, not by winning debates, but by silencing them. And universities are folding under the pressure, with Columbia University, for example, publicly promising to investigate pro-Palestinian students to avoid losing billions in federal funding. This dynamic, though, existed before Trump. It was always about capitalist and financial concerns for universities over the rights of students and protests. Khalil himself even wrote an op-ed while I was editing this where he said, quote, "Since my abduction on March 8th, the intimidation and kidnapping of international students who stand for Palestine has only accelerated. The logic used by the federal government to target myself and my peers is a direct extension of Columbia's repression playbook concerning Palestine. This institution's singular concern has always been the vitality of its financial profile, not the safety of Jewish students. This is why Columbia was all too happy to embrace a superficial progressive agenda while still disregarding Palestine, and this is why it will soon turn on you, too." And it doesn't end there. Hospitals and schools that support trans people are facing threats of defunding too. The pattern is unmistakable. Trump's administration is using state power to punish dissent, destroy support systems, and label the most vulnerable as the cause of everyone else's suffering. It's trans people's fault that your local hospital doesn't have the medicine you need. If only the hospital just stopped supporting trans people, well then, they could get their money and you'd be perfectly fine, I'm sure. It's an authoritarian feedback loop, a war on truth, on education, on care itself. Because when the system breaks, fascism doesn't try to fix it, it just finds someone to blame. And all of this points to the broader goal, the destruction of public life itself. Our hospitals, our schools, and even foundational programs like Social Security are being gutted. Not because they're failing, but because they, on some level, worked. Even despite being slowly eroded for decades by politicians motivated by capital rather than public good. They were systems that were facilitated by the state that allowed people to have greater independence. But the more these systems are dismantled, the more American government fails to provide for people, the more Americans are left disenfranchised, desperate, and dependent. When you strip away education, healthcare, and social safety nets, you don't just manufacture economic crisis, you eliminate alternatives. You narrow people's choices down to obedience, conformity, or ruin. And crucially, you isolate them. When every moment of your life is consumed by trying to survive, working longer hours, picking up extra shifts, navigating medical debt, rent hikes, and food insecurity, you don't have time to organize, to resist, or to even think clearly. You're too exhausted to connect with others, to even just have a sense of community. You're too scared to slow down. And now you have the system tells you that it's your fault, that if you're suffering, you must have made bad choices. Or worse, that someone else took what you deserve. The immigrants, the trans people, China. Anyone but the people who broke the world on purpose. That's the power of this design. It isolates you, breaks you down, and then hands you an enemy to blame. And what fills that vacuum is the heterosexual nuclear family. When people can no longer afford to live independently, they're forced to seek stability in traditional family structures, not by choice, but by necessity. If gender nonconformity is outlawed, if gay marriage is overturned, if queer people are cut off from jobs, housing, or healthcare, then what remains is the enforced return to heterosexuality as the dominant and increasingly only mode of life. Heterosexual marriage becomes a financial necessity. Women are also pushed back into dependency. Queer people are pushed back into the closet. And the cruelty of the system is that all of this is repackaged as the natural order, that this is just the way things are supposed to be, instead of the truth that it is a regimentedly enforced order. In fascist Italy, Mussolini believed that for the nation to rise as a dominant power, it needed a population boom. More workers, more soldiers, more citizens. He aimed to grow Italy's population from 40 million to 60 million, using a combination of tax incentives, job opportunities, and cultural propaganda to encourage and eventually enforce motherhood. Women who bore 6 or more children were held up as exemplary citizens, and in 1933, Mussolini even hosted a public celebration in Rome for mothers who gave birth to many children. This ideology echoes much of Elon Musk's rhetoric around increasing the birth rate, rhetoric that, implicitly or explicitly, centers white babies. It's not just about population growth, it's a way to generate more labor for capitalist systems and signal alignment with far-right white supremacist ideals. And this heterosexuality is often violently enforced. In Nazi Germany, one of the regime's earliest cultural targets was the queer and trans community. As I pointed out numerous times, the Nazis raided and destroyed the Institute of Sexology, a groundbreaking center for gender-affirming care and trans research, and they publicly burned its archives. Trans people, lesbians, bisexuals, and gay men were arrested, imprisoned, and forced into conversion therapy if they were considered good Aryan stock, or sent to concentration camps if they weren't. All of it was part of the larger eugenicist project, to reestablish proper gender roles, to promote state-controlled reproduction, and to eliminate anyone who disrupted the ideal of the strong, fertile, Aryan heterosexual family. Gender nonconformity wasn't a moral offense, it was a threat to fascistic social order, so they labeled it a moral offense. And that same logic is resurging now through all of the enforcement of anti-trans laws, and make no mistake, will be followed up by things like attack on gay marriage. Because it's one of the few ways that queer people are allowed within the system as it stands now to have financial independence, but it goes even deeper. Controlling women's bodies through abortion bans and domestication isn't just about moral control, it's about production. Under fascism, reproduction becomes national duty. The state needs more workers, more soldiers, more loyal citizens who won't question the system they were born into because they don't even have access to education. And when you eliminate access to abortion, you're not just forcing childbirth, you're enforcing a doctrine of compulsory reproduction. You're turning bodies into factories for the state. And queerness, in all of its forms, becomes a direct threat to that machinery. Because queerness disrupts the conveyor belt. It resists standardization. And when I say queerness, I don't just mean in terms of sexuality or gender, but in the broader radical desire to be something else, to live differently, to opt out of the roles you've been assigned. Queerness says you don't have to replicate the state, you don't have to reproduce the nation, you can choose your own life, you can define your own family, you can love without permission. And that, to an authoritarian system built on obedience, hierarchy, and reproduction, is unforgivable. Which is precisely why it must be crushed. Queerness thrives when people have independence, and queerness is resistance. And so the system is being redesigned to make independence impossible. That's why you see fascism quite often attacking queer history and the history of many other marginalized groups, to erase the fact that we could have ever lived any other way, that queer people have always existed throughout history, that we are a natural part of humanity, rather than something antithetical to it like fascism wants us to believe. And of course, any honest accounting of fascism in America must contend with its foundation, anti-blackness. White supremacy isn't just a feature of Trump-style fascism, it's the foundation. Nowhere is that clearer than in the administration's relentless attacks on DEI.
The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative spelled out on the agency's website. Can you imagine?
Originally meant to mean diversity, equity, and inclusion, that is, ensuring marginalized people are respected, treated fairly, and made to feel like they belong, DEI became initiatives within many institutions that was reduced to hollow metrics and performative gestures that in many cases actually mainly benefited white women. But Trump's allies have seized on that shallow implementation to recast DEI as a threat, turning it into a slur. This rhetorical turn taps into and helps justify one of America's most enduring racist myths, that black people and other minorities are inherently less capable. If someone from a marginalized group, especially a black person, holds a position of power, the assumption that many of these folks already have, even regardless of DEI, is, of course they're not as good. They must not be qualified. They don't belong. And DEI becomes the convenient excuse to justify this already presupposed assumption. DEI just gives them an excuse to do something that they already wanted to do. It's not the reason, it's the excuse. And we've seen a perfect example of this with the firing of General C.Q. Brown Jr., the Air Force general who sat as chair of the Joint Chief of Staffs. I'm not someone who supports the military or what it stands for, but objectively, there is no way Brown Jr. rose to that rank without being exceptionally competent at his job. He almost certainly had to work harder than most of his white peers just to be seen as equal. And yet right-wing voices have reduced him to a DEI hire, erasing decades of service to fire a man who isn't loyal to Trump under the ingrained assumption that white men are simply inherently more deserving, and using DEI as an excuse to justify that. Trump just wanted to fire a man who wasn't loyal to him, and all of his racist followers allowed it because they're racist. And they assumed, of course, this black general had to be a DEI hire, because why would he have gotten his job otherwise? It's white supremacy cloaked in meritocratic language, using the failures of shallow corporate and institutional reform to justify a purge, stripping authority from those who don't fit the mold of whiteness, maleness, and loyalty to Trump and his project. And it's not just institutional. Trump's proposed tariffs will disproportionately harm black communities as well, the very communities already gutted by decades and centuries of economic inequality, housing discrimination, and systemic disinvestment. These same communities will then be weaponized as spectacle, held up by Trumpian fascists as proof that white Americans should be grateful. You may be suffering, they'll say, but at least you're not them. The underlying message is always the same, that black people are poor because they're lazy, undeserving, and inherently less capable. It's not just racist dogma, it's a core belief and a justification, a warning. Work harder, be grateful, or end up like them. All of this is textbook fascism. Every single piece of it. The targeting of minorities, the destruction of public institutions, the erosion of truth, the consolidation of power, and yes, the tariffs. Because the tariffs only make sense within this plan. They're not meant to improve the economy, they're meant to destabilize it. They're meant to hurt people, to isolate them, to push them toward fear, desperation, and blind loyalty. Trump isn't trying to work within the system, he's trying to break it. He has no interest in economic growth unless it consolidates his power, no interest in jobs unless they serve him, no interest in America unless he is America.
Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong.
And yet, despite all of this, we still see voices downplaying the threat. I keep seeing articles that say things like, well, Trump can't run for a third term, it's unconstitutional. As if the man who tried to overturn an election through violence is going to be stopped by a piece of paper. As if fascism is ever halted by rules alone, instead of being punched in the fucking face. People like Jason Wittenberg, a political scientist, repeatedly, continually downplay Trump's threat.
My bottom line is that fears about Trump are not entirely unfounded, but they're massively overblown. There's just no plausible circumstances under which an illiberal government could be implemented. There's no way it could happen.
There's no way it could happen. As if it isn't already happening. As if fascism announces itself with a press release. It doesn't. It arrives dressed in patriotism or holding a Bible, promising jobs and order and greatness. It arrives with smiles and slogans, and market crashes. It arrives while everyone insists it can't. Trump doesn't care about the system. He never did. He does what he wants, and the system be damned. That's not subtext, it's policy. We see it everywhere, perhaps most clearly in how his administration handles deportations. Take the recent case of Abrigo Garcia, a Maryland man who was deported to El Salvador even after it was discovered, before he was sent, that a clerical error was responsible for his arrest and deportation order. The system knew it was wrong, they admitted it. But the Trump administration deported him anyways. And now they don't care to even try to get him back because they don't want to. They don't care about due process. They don't care about justice because following the law was never the point. They use the law when it suits them and discard it when it doesn't. The system isn't something they uphold, it's a tool. And when it breaks, they just use the broken pieces as weapons. Elon Musk and Trump are just symptoms, hydra heads of a larger problem. And it just frustrates me when I see people sitting here saying the tariffs don't make sense when they make perfect sense. These policies aren't designed to stimulate growth. They're designed to stimulate fear, to generate hardship, to manufacture crisis that can be channeled into obedience. It's why they just plugged in some nonsense into ChatGPT, printed out a graph, and called it an economic plan. Not because it holds up under any sort of scrutiny, but because it sounds smart to people who've been denied the tools to know better. People who've watched the Department of Education get gutted, who've seen schools defunded and curricula rewritten, who've been taught not how to think, but how to obey. And we really need to stop settling for what amounts to liberal cope. Saying, oh, well, Trump can't do that because, the system's not designed that way. Or saying, oh, well, he'll come to his senses when he realizes that that's a bad plan for America.
Or just laughing at how stupid he is.
This depression is going to be so great. We'll be the ones eating the cats and the dogs. That's going to be fun.
Yes, they're not very smart. They wouldn't be fascists otherwise. That doesn't mean they're not dangerous, and just sitting there smugly laughing isn't going to do anything.
And on top of that, we also have to stop laughing at Trump voters as they suffer and say, ha, this is your fault. Aren't you glad that you're suffering? I've seen all the memes. I've seen people mocking MAGA fans who suddenly realize they can't afford a game console or who watch their small town get crushed under the very policies they voted for. And look, I get it. That anger is real. I enjoy the schadenfreude too. That rage that we have is earned. And very much, I think, amongst ourselves, yeah, it's okay to scream, to vent, to roll our eyes at the absurdity of it all, to get angry at these people. But that can't be our only response. Because if all we do is laugh at working class people, even the ones who voted for this, we're doing exactly what the fascists want. We're making enemies out of the wrong people. We're reinforcing the same isolation, the same alienation, and the same rage that pushed them into Trump's arms in the first place. Because meanwhile, Elon Musk is still rich, stupidly rich. He may cry about Tesla stock, but don't be fooled. He's not playing the same game. He's playing the long-term collapse. He's fine losing money now if it means reshaping the world in his image, in his weird libertarian expanse core nightmare that he thinks is Star Trek, but is actually just techno-feudalism with rockets. And the people who will suffer for it won't be him, it will be us. All of us. And I also want to point out that, yeah, there have been things that have been giving people hope lately. Wisconsin's Supreme Court win, despite Elon Musk trying to buy the vote, for example. Or also Cory Booker's record-breaking speech, where he took the title of longest Senate speech away from the segregationist Storm Thurmond. And that matters. I don't want to diminish what it meant to see someone finally stand up and say something. A leader showing a little bit of fucking spine. That kind of symbolic defiance can be energizing. It gave some Democrats, especially grassroots organizers, the sense that maybe, just maybe, they could actually do something to push back. But we have to be honest about that. These are vibes. Booker's speech, inspiring as it was, wasn't even a filibuster. It didn't block or delay anything. Republicans confirmed Trump appointees right after he finished talking. It was symbolic, and yes, meaningful, but also ephemeral. It doesn't change the material conditions we're in or are going to be in. And the truth is, Democrats as an institutional agent, and this is something I think even if you're a liberal or a leftist we can agree on, are not equipped right now to do anything tangible. And in my opinion, as a leftist, they never really were. Not when so many of them are fundamentally tied to the same neoliberal logic, the same capitalist order that is now locking arms with fascism. But even regardless of that, the best we can hope for from them right now is to occasionally show enough emotion that it jolts us awake again. Just enough to remind us that the fight is still ours and has always been ours, not theirs. Personally, I believe things are going to get a hell of a lot worse in the near future because of the direct result of this intended economic downturn. Everything that I have described here is going to get accelerated, like gasoline on a fire. But I don't say that to be doomeristic or fatalistic, but to try to redirect you to where I think the actual hope lies. Because what we have to do right now is build, form community. I've said this 1 billion times, and I'll say it again, start now. Work within your community. Build up systems of care outside the state. Because the systems we have are being deliberately dismantled. Programs meant to help people are being stripped apart in real time. And in the face of this intentional destabilization, the best weapon we have is each other. And whenever I say this, I get a lot of people in my comments or in my email asking me for specifics on what exactly to do, where to start. And to be entirely honest, it's actually really hard for me to answer that because I'm not in your communities. I don't know what yours looks like and what it needs, what strengths it holds, or where there are opportunities. I'm just a nerdy Trekkie dancing on the internet for you. But I can offer some general pointers, some starting points. And they all begin with this. Show up, look around, ask what's missing, and ask what you can give. Mutual aid, for example, isn't just survival, it's resistance. It breaks the cycle of us versus them that fascism feeds on. When you help give to people who are in need, that can really help. On top of that, when you start to show up and build community, it shows other people that you can form that around you, that they can build that together. When people see trans people and queer people showing up, black communities caring for each other, Jewish and Muslim religious groups forming community events, especially interfaith solidarity work, when people in your neighborhood are organizing food drives or hosting teach-ins, starting clinics, putting on plays in the park, when we're all visible, grounded, and kind, that has power. That allows us not just to fight back by pushing back against the state, but to feeding ourselves. And we need to use that power. We don't win this by laughing down from a tower. We win by being with people, caring for them, listening, and yes, punching Nazis in the face when we have to, which is all the time. We always have to punch them in the face. On top of that, create third spaces. Make art. Show up to local shows, to festivals, to community gatherings. Make them if you don't have them. Build culture, build connection, build places where people can imagine a world outside of this one. I just did a video on that a few weeks ago on that very topic. Because once people feel that, not just hear about it, but feel it, they start to believe something else is possible. And then they look around and realize that it's possible within their community. And that's when this machine starts to crack. We destabilize fascism by providing for each other, by creating beauty between ourselves, by being ungovernable together. Hopefully this was a good video to you. This actually started off as a video for my secondary channel where I was just expressing my frustration with people saying, oh, the tariffs don't make any sense, where I'm just sitting here being like, they make perfect sense. But it's kind of careened as I was writing this weekend into something much bigger. So here you go. This is kind of a basics video on fascism and what's happening now in the United States. It's not meant to be super in-depth, but I just wanted to write something that was like, just look at what's happening, people. So yeah, this wasn't a deep dive, but just sort of a cursory look at this stuff. But I think one that people frankly need to hear to break out of that mindset of still thinking by the logic of what we've been told to constantly expect, because fascism doesn't play by that logic anymore. That being said, to kind of build on the last stuff that I was talking about hope and community and all that stuff, I do want to offer up some good news that I have. I just recently learned, literally last week, that my movie IDENTITEAZE, which if you haven't seen it, it's available on Nebula, and also, by the way, also available on Blu-ray now. I don't make money on the Blu-ray sales, other people do, but I just like it being out there. It has extra bonus features and all this stuff. I did a director's commentary. Anyways, sorry, I'm hawking my wares, but I'm actually excited about it. Anyways, I just learned that IDENTITEAZE is an honoree for the 2025 Webby Awards, alongside a few other wonderful Nebula original creations by some of my, like Tom Nicholson's Boomers documentary, which is absolutely fantastic. Congratulations to my fellow Nebula folks. They are amazing, wonderful, creative people, and I'm so glad that they are being recognized. I'm so glad that IDENTITEAZE is being recognized. This is honestly one of the biggest recognitions that I've ever gotten, and it feels nice. Like, I don't make art to be recognized by an institution or anything like that, but every once in a while it's nice to know, hey, your creative peers see you. So that's really cool. To do the Hawk on My Wares thing, it is available on Nebula and Blu-ray, so you can support me there. Use the link below and all of that stuff to get that. Also, on that note, I will say, if you do want to support me doing what I do, making more videos, I do have a Patreon. I do want to say I am working on some really big projects. This was kind of a quick video that I just made because of my frustration going on right now, but I do have other big projects that I'm working on that are hopefully going to be more hopeful and engaging and things like that, that I'm working here on YouTube. Like, I have a big video hopefully coming out in June-ish, so I might be skipping May. Might have a couple small things here and there, but June-ish I have a big video coming out. But also, I've teased this a couple times. I can't announce it just yet, but I have a few, two major big projects that I'm working on outside of YouTube that I am currently working on. I can't officially announce them just yet, but what I will say is this. One of them will have me sitting back in the director's chair, and I'm very pumped for that. And the other thing has me writing a hell of a lot. for things that aren't YouTube videos. So that's all I can announce right now. Hopefully I'll be able to announce more in the near-ish future, but they're going to be big things outside of YouTube. And again, I'll just reiterate, like, the way I'm able to work on those projects is those projects aren't really paying me a whole bunch. In fact, I lose some money on some of them. I am able to do that and pay my bills and all those things through Patreon support. Especially right now, my fiance, my cats, and I are all able to support ourselves and to make art through people who support me over on Patreon. So if you can support me there, that'd be great as well. But beyond all of that, thank you again. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for, getting me to a place where I could, make something like this and be honored in this way. But beyond all of that, I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.